ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. This is a webinar that we have been planning for some time. It's actually the first webinar of Economic Advisory Group. We have had several other events, but this is the first webinar. We will start by just talking a bit about EAG, a brief introduction on EAG, and then we really will get to the heart of the matter, introduce Dr. Ali Hasanain and the discussion. I have to say this, I mean, most chairmen and CEOs say they always try and surround themselves with brighter people than themselves, but they really very often don't really mean it. Unfortunately, in my case, it's actually quite true. Most of the people around me are significantly brighter and are definitely better economists than myself. So in some ways, it's a bit embarrassing, but it has been great to learn from them. And the objectives are quite simple for EAG, is to take simple ideas, market-based ideas, try and make them practicable, try and disseminate them, have some ground reality in terms of what is effective in Pakistan. But really what we think very often in Pakistan, economics 101 is derided. Market economics is very often misunderstood. Capitalism is seen as a very dark force. We want to see if some of these things, myths, can be disabused, if one can put it that way. Having said that, there are obviously market failures, and one has to be very cognizant of that. And that's a good way to segue into what some of the work which Dr. Ali Hasanain has been doing. Now, Dr. Ali Hasanain is, those of you who are academics know him extremely well. He's probably one of the leading young economists in Pakistan. He is a doctorate from George Mason University, also has a postdoc from Princeton and Oxford. He's done several research papers which are now widely being used in Ivy League universities. Some of the work about institutions and the lack of institutions or the failings of institutions in terms of ensuring market effectiveness is something which is a key area of research for him. So I think he's someone we are very proud to have as an executive member of EAG. I have to say it took a lot of persuasion to get him on board. But I think one of the few things I can pride myself about is that there's a persuasive ability, being an ex-investment banker. So we are very proud to have Ali Hasanain. He was the chair, or he is still the chair of the economics department in LUMS, but he's outgoing. He's associate professor there. He's also been involved in Pakistan Pakistan at 100 with the World Bank, which is a project. He's also written in several international journals, including some popular journals like Huffington Post and Economist, but also more serious ones which are related to economics. So he's both a very serious economist, plus someone who also does a very important thing, which is very, very much required in Pakistan, which is the dissemination of really common sense economic ideas among the general public. One thing I have to say, Ali, and you'll forgive me, every time I talk to you, I feel slightly intimidated because you correct me. Well, it's a lot of your colleagues, and I have to rethink many of my ideas, which is a bad thing, but actually in the end, it's a good thing. So I'll hand over the floor to you, and some ground rules. I think this presentation, Ali has something like 50 slides. We've asked him to cut it down to, I don't know if he'll manage to do it, about 20 slides, so that we can, after about 30, 35 minutes, have a conversation, discussion. We very much want audience participation in this whole process. So Ali, I hand it over to you. Thank you very much. And we are very honored to have you there as part of EAG and part of the economic community in Pakistan.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, and thank you very much for that kind introduction. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I managed to get the slides down to 39, and I think that should be enough. All right. So this is a slide deck that I've been building for quite a while, and it's you add in a few things, but as Javed Saab said, perhaps the ideas are relatively simple. In fact, quite simple. And the reason for that is that when we think about economics as an academic discipline, the point of doing the research is that we want to be at the cutting edge of understanding. But sometimes that can mean that you lose the forest for the trees. And so what I've been doing over the last few years across various activities is to try to build up my version of what we should be doing and our sense of priorities. And one of my frustrations is that I find that the economics discourse in Pakistan tends not to focus in on some of these fundamentals as much as I think it should. Maybe it's obvious, but I think it's important to articulate and to think about our priorities. So another title for this presentation could be thinking long-term on Pakistan's economy, because a lot of the things that I'm going to propose that we do will impact how we, will impact our growth rates, will impact our ability to transform economically, but will not be able to get us through the fuel subsidy crisis or devaluation or the IMF issue. So there's a lot of important stuff about the economy, including stabilization, trade, taxation, that I'm going to touch upon. But there are plenty of people, both within EAG and within the broader economics community in Pakistan now, who are doing great work, specifically focusing on that. And one of the things that I'm extremely happy about is the expansion and maturity of the economics policy, I would say, community over the last 3-4 years in particular. I think people tended to work more in silos, and there's been much more discussion. At least I've found that to be true over the last few years. So let's get started. The first question is, what are the big problems of the Pakistan economy? And for me, this is a great graph to start from. If you look at life expectancy in Pakistan and you compare to other South Asian countries, Pakistan had the second highest life expectancy at birth in 1960, and today has the second lowest. And so it has increased literally at the slowest rate in South Asia. And so you start thinking two things. One, why are we increasing? And two, why are we increasing slower than others? So why we are increasing is pretty simple. This is a global thing. If you look at life expectancy across the world 200 years ago, and you compare that with life expectancy 50, 70 years ago to now, you can see that because of advances in science and technology, both in terms of medicine and food technologies, we have better medicines and we are better fed. And that's one reason or two reasons why life expectancy has grown. So really, having a positive trajectory on some of these things is not something to pat ourselves on the back on. That's just the world that we live in, that Pakistan lives in. And then if you look at GDP per capita, same story. Pakistan has gone from being among the sort of, was often the third richest country in GDP per capita terms, or even the second richest country in GDP per capita terms in South Asia, as recently as 1990, to today being near the bottom. And so and although at the same time we've had an increase, so we are getting richer. We are not getting richer nearly as much as peer countries are. And so that for me is the big question that we're going to ask. Why do we have a slower rate of growth? We have an increase in many outcomes, but it's happening at a lower rate than the rest of our region. And the question is, why is that so? and fundamentally, what are the key decisions that we have to take, or the key directions that we have to take in order to grow faster. So for me, it all starts with security of life, property, and contract. If we go back to Adam Smith, before he wrote The Wealth of Nations, he said, little else is requisite to carry a state to the highest degree of opulence, from the lowest barbarism, but peace, easy taxes, and a tolerable administration of justice, all the rest being brought about by the natural course of things. And for me, this is very close to, he's near the bullseye, if he's not quite, or perhaps the world has gotten a bit more complex since then, and there are a few things to add, but this is very close to all you need to know. So if someone doesn't have time and wants to leave now, that slide will do it. So little else is requisite to carry a state to the highest degree of opulence, from the lowest barbarism, but peace and justice and easy taxes. That's all. And this is a candid explanation, because if you look at peace and justice, if we look at order and security, Pakistan has the 137th worst order and security, and specifically security in the world, right? So that's like third from lowest. And so, and it's not just order and security, but it's also our enforcement of the law. So if you look at our enforcement of regulations, regulations being the government telling us what to do that is not served by the market, we're also among the lowest. So the fact that we are doing so poorly on the rule of law, and keeping Adam Smith's quote in mind that we have that we need peace and justice, this starts giving you a sense of where we are. Now, I've done work based on Ali Chaudhry's work that he did based on Baker and Bloom, where all of us have looked at economic policy uncertainty. And this Pakistan's economic secretariat will have noticed that this is an indicator that the State Bank now has published in its Easy Data portal. It's also something so how do we build this? We go and we crawl the websites of major English language newspapers, and we look for words that correlate with the idea of economic policy uncertainty. And so that's your orange trend here. And then I have worked with Farid Zafar and Hina Osman that detects political violence in the country over time. And if you look at this, you see two things. One, that there is quite clear that we have some co-movement of these trends. And secondly, and I don't need to tell you today, in this month and during the crisis that we're in right now, that actually economic sort of uncertainty can emanate from sources other than political violence, of course. But it is a major source of risk, of country risk. And when you have security of life, when you are able to move around in your country freely and without reservation, you'd have a spread of investments, right? So we have large regions of the country that are termed alaka-e-ghair, or at least there are significant regions where I would feel uncomfortable driving alone after sunset, which means that my willingness to go and explore opportunities for win-win trades with people living there is decreased. And so security of life also means that you're able to tap economic opportunity and grow that way. So that's the first thing, security of life being important. Second, let me quote James Madison, one of the founding fathers of the US, writing in 1792, "If the United States mean to obtain or deserve the full praise due to wise and just governments, they will equally respect the rights of property and human rights." So rights of property, right? And why is that? So security of property helps the economy through multiple channels. If you look at this graph is a little hard to read. Let me explain the first one. So on the left, you see property protection rank. So the country that ranks first has the lowest. So the best country has the lowest rank on the y-axis, and the country that has the worst will be the highest. So as you move from a poor protection rank to a good protection rank, you see that there's a correlation on income per capita. The second thing is that, and so why is this? One reason for this is that your expropriation risk, the risk that your property will be captured by another, goes down. And this correlates quite neatly, quite tightly with income per capita. Now, there is micro level evidence that shows that when I know that my property is not going to be interfered with, that I will be willing to invest more in it, that I will increase my ability to attract foreign investment, and this will eventually lead to higher exports. So one of the major concerns of any economist in Pakistan is how to fix exports, and this will have an effect. So getting property rights in the country right now, if you look at the usual prescriptions, property rights fixing exports, that seems like a stretch, but the evidence is clear and the logic is quite certain, quite clear also. If someone is going to invest in your country and they're worried about their investment, well, why would they? And that also then goes to domestic investors. Why would you ever invest money in a place that you're worried someone will run away with it? Which is why you see more people investing in DHAs than outside DHAs in Pakistan in real estate. So first of all, why do we invest in real estate? Title is relatively better. If you were to invest in, for example, stock that you purchase for an entrepreneur, you say, okay, I'm going to give you 80% of your stock I own. Well, how do you put property title on the yarns of cloth that he has, or the patties for burgers that he's going to sell? All of that. How do you secure title and ownership on those things? You can't. So you go to the asset that is most secure, which in Pakistan usually is DHA plots for at least a certain class. So getting property rights fixed will both increase investment within the country and create more export chances. Then security of contracts. Security of contracts unlocks economies of scale. So this is two parcels of land of equal size in Punjab, just outside Lahore, and in Illinois in the US. Productivity on the parcel of land in the US is many multiples of I think it's something like 20 times. They get the 20 times the amount of grain out of the same parcel of land in Illinois as they do in Punjab, even though the environment is broadly similar. And why is that? Well, one candidate, and there are of course many other reasons, such as access to technology, such as better farm extension work and all of that. But one important reason why is that in Illinois, I can come to you if you're an owner of land next to me and I'm a better manager than you, I can walk up to you and say, why don't you give me your land? Stay at home. I'll earn more money than you would have by combining our parcels of land, by not having to turn around my tractor so many times, by being able to bring in technologies that are only suitable for larger farms. I'll do this and I'll pay you more than you make right now at home. Well, if you entered into that contract with me, the next thing that I would do rationally in Pakistan is never pay you back and keep your property, right? To the extent that's possible. And this shows up in the data on how farms are being used in Pakistan, specifically here in Punjab. The orange and the purple is owner cultivated land, and the green is tenant cultivated. And what we've been unable to do is the fundamental idea in corporate governance. We've been unable to separate ownership of assets from their control. And for those who might not be familiar, this is important because ownership is not an indicator of your ability to manage your property. And by being able to bring in professional managers, you can improve the efficiency with which your assets are able to be used. Again, I would never give my property to a manager unless I was very certain that they would come back and give me the amount of money that they had promised. So that's the contract, and return my land, so the property. So having security of property and contracts is important for that reason. Now, all three of these things, security of life, property, and contracts, contribute, or the lack thereof, contributes to our low savings rate. And so there might be macroeconomists here who know more about the reasons for this than I would. But one of the fundamental puzzles of our economy is, what are we doing wrong in order to not bring more investment into why aren't we investing more into building more tomorrow so that we can live better lives over time? In other words, grow through capital accumulation. There might be macroeconomic reasons, as I said, but one contributor to the answer is structural, in the sense that you want to have better life, property, and contract. It's not just that these things encourage but don't guarantee a crucial requirement of the economy. What you have to really be assessing the economy across sectors on, and that is quite simply Econ 100, competition. Unless we are able to compete, we're not going to build a more effective organization of our economic resources. Security of life that allows me to go and compete with a local somewhere, security of property, and security of contract all mean that entry into different types of sectors is more possible for us to do. And so now I want to come to, so that was the first part of my conversation, that we need to have security of life, property, and contract. Let me move now to back to Madison and say this. So he says a just security to property is not afforded by that government under which unequal taxes oppress one species of property and reward another species, where arbitrary taxes invade the domestic sanctuaries of the rich and excessive taxes grind the faces of the poor. What's important here is, when you have different tax rates or different subsidies, or you say that we're going to price, for example, gas or electricity differently for different consumers, for whatever reason you have in mind, what you're doing is you're saying we are no longer going to have opportunity cost, that is the comparison of my usage of a resource versus your usage of a resource effectively anymore. We're going to remove the invisible hand, or we're going to remove proper efficient market functioning from arbitrating on whether I should use gas or you should use gas. Right? Now, there are reasons why, obviously reasons why we create these market barriers, but those have to do with trying to solve the problem of fairness through deteriorating efficiency. And this might have been important back in the day, but with the advent of better IDs, we have the capacity with NADRA and BISP to be doing better directed subsidies, so basically expand BISP. And so as long as you're doing that, as long as you're protecting people by expanding, sort of ensuring that there's a minimum that everyone reaches, we should not be changing prices arbitrarily. And I think one of the failures of the Pakistan economy is that we have never learned this lesson, that we have created unequal taxes, arbitrary taxes, and it's not just taxes, but also prices that you face for public goods. So that's a good segue into fixing taxes. And I'll be quick here because this is something that many people in the audience will already understand. A tax revenue as a percentage of GDP in Pakistan is quite low compared to a broad set of sort of not just peers. I mean, developed countries, of course, are a totally different ballgame, but countries that we might think of as closer to being peers, like the Congo or India or China or Egypt, all have a tax to GDP ratio that is about twice what we have. So for whatever income they're earning, they're extracting about twice as much, which means multiple things. But one thing that it means is that governments are able to deliver public goods better. So if you walk into a government department right now, pick a government department, for the most part, everyone is feeling the pinch on resources. We have massive underinvestment in all sorts of things. But one reason is it's not that we are not rich enough, it's that we are not taxing either properly, and I'll come back to that, but also enough. And I think this is for me, the key graph to understand what we're doing with taxation. Besides the fact that sort of income tax, I think everyone understands. But agriculture is about 23% of our GDP, contributes less than 1% of taxes. Industry is less than 20% and contributes 70% in taxes. Then we wonder why we're deindustrializing, right? If you're going to tax an activity, way more than it deserves to be taxed, well, it's going to shrink. And if you look at indicators of not just our industry size, but the makeup of our industry, I don't have that slide here, but there's been a decline since the 90s, and this might be one reason why. And then services is not getting taxed nearly as much as it might. Now, so I'm going to talk a little bit about lessons that we can learn from other countries. And my first one comes from China, where China over the years has increased subnational, or that is provincial or district level revenue and expenditure levels. So they've actually, in Pakistan, the China model is talked about, is conflated with the presidential model of governance or a lack of democracy and free speech. But actually, the China model is an authoritarian government at the top, but high decentralization below that. So you have the first sort of impact of that is that districts are left to extract revenues through their own means. And so you can see that Pakistan, you can compare the 15.9% of revenue that the provinces are. So of every 100 rupees that the provinces spend, they are collecting themselves only 15.9, as opposed to these days 47%, but at the start of the Reformation in China, up to 78% of resources. And if Yun Ang and her book have become quite popular in Pakistani Twitter, if you've engaged with this work, you'll know that at critical times of the reform effort, namely when China was just starting off and had absolutely nothing in the treasury, they were as bad as we are. What they did was they said, okay, we can't hand over money to the provinces and districts. Let the districts earn or generate through their own fees, through whatever else they want. And so if you look at here, it says local state budgets and non-tax collections such as fees, you're allowed to extract revenue through multiple classes of revenue instruments that you don't have to then pay to the federation or the province, you keep within the district. And what this meant was, what this implied was that bureaucrat salaries were able to not just keep pace with the rest of China, they actually did better, right? So, but why is that important? It's important for this reason. So this is an interview that she did. We hope to forge a friendly business environment by providing all around services. We want to serve businesses well because every business has a thick network behind it, including friends and business associates. If we serve one investor well, we can access and mobilize these resources and attract more investors. Now, why is a district officer worried about bringing in more investors? Because thereby we can promote our district's economic development and tax revenue base. So you go to a DC in Punjab or KP or wherever, and you say, extract more resources, but then you say, give that to the provincial government or give that to the federation. Why would they do that? Instead, if you give me a second here, guys, sorry. Instead, if you allow them to generate resources that they can keep themselves, even at a time when the federation is nearly bankrupt, as it often is here, and without sort of really to being at the detriment of the federation's ability to extract the taxes it does, you can allow for public good provision, sort of roads to get fixed, schools to start getting filled with better teachers, all of that stuff start happening at the district level. That is the China model, right? And that is, to me, the crucial idea. Well, one of two crucial ideas that China did was that it allowed for the bureaucracy to compete with itself. So one DC in Kasur is competing with the DC in Sahiwal, is competing with the DC in Ladkana, and so on and so forth. That is a crucial idea. Our bureaucracy needs to compete within itself. And then what has India done? Because so India is an interesting case, and there are many paths to growth. India has, I sold you the idea of security of life, property, and contract. India doesn't have that. China does, by the way, to a much greater degree. What India has done clearly is that they set up the IITs and IIMs, starting from the law passed in 1961 that protected these institutes of national importance, made them autonomous, ensured there was no student politics, and gave them advisors from Russia, the UK, Germany, including getting MIT and Harvard support to establish these campuses, and gave them 9 times the budgets of other public sector universities. Now, as an administrator, I can tell you, universities, good universities, are extremely expensive. And to have the government not support that is, of course, problematic. But they were able to do this without creating the sort of dysfunctionality that we have over the last 20 years. And as a result, there is no university. And so just to defend my own institution, these rankings depend also on the size of the university. But Lums is a small place. It might fight well pound for pound, but it is nowhere near the scale of one of the institutes of national importance in India. And we have nothing in the public sector that is able to compete, which is why we see prosperity in one generation. So this is Sundar Pichai in his dorm room. And if you think of where Sundar Pichai and his peers are at this point, and you look at the dorm room where he got his education, that's the power of education. We haven't gotten that right. And what's happened now is that India has gone from earning, Indian Americans have gone from earning roughly the same as their Pakistani counterparts to earning more than 50% more or thereabouts. What every country on this list did was that they grew through exports. They emphasized at crucial moments. So if you go to and read about Adam Smith talking about China, he says China isn't growing back in his day, in the 1700s, because it's closed itself. It's closed itself to goods and services. It's closed itself to ideas. Deng Xiaoping, we must expand and open up our economy. We stagnated for 300 years because we didn't open up our economy. Narasimha Rao in India, I want trade, not aid. The way to create a self-reliant India is to generate enough exports to pay for our imports. That to me is a crucial, obviously, goes without saying. So now, the last part of my lecture is about where do we go from here? And for me, really following the Asimoglu-Robinson framework that they established in their papers in the late 90s, early 2000s, any change that you see will be because you have, for one of two reasons. One, the status quo power centers will get swept away, or two, they'll realize that they might get swept away, and they, in anticipation of that, undertake reforms and concede benefits to the larger public. So Pakistan now has more young people than ever, and people of a working age in Pakistan will only continue to rise over the next 20 years in particular, before it starts leveling off, hopefully, unless we do something about it. And more importantly than that, this is a population that is getting failed by our education system and has already been failed by our education system. So if you look at, I believe that between 2014 and now, we've gotten net enrollment rates up a little bit better, but we have had consistently through the 2000s, we've had consistently lower enrollment levels in this country compared to our peers. And as a result, and actually, and that's not all. 45% of rural children in rural areas in class 5 can't read English at class 2 level, and 41% can't read stories in their local languages or Urdu. So about 2 out of 5 kids in a rural school in Pakistan is getting nothing out of their education, which means that the number of people that we have on the streets now who have no economic future is massive. And unless we are able to start creating reforms and give them, sort of show them a path, keep in mind that this has never happened in Pakistan before. The numbers are getting scary. And what it's going to do is it's going to impact the country's economic, political stability. So the big power centers of the country, democratic and otherwise, might get overthrown unless we start doing something about this. So that's one. That's the first big threat. The second big threat, and this ties into the first one and exacerbates the problem, is that automation is making it much harder to think of a future with as many jobs as we have now. So if you look at this graph, Asimov and Restrepo collected data from 1947 onwards, and they break it down into, essentially, this is what tasks the economy has available for people to do. And between 1947 and 1987, every task that was displaced by new technologies coming in that was doing the job that a human used to do led to that person being reinstated in another part of the economy. So think of your Uber driver as an example of a job that didn't exist before, and think perhaps of your rickshaw driver standing sort of for hours waiting for a passenger as the job being displaced. That's a like-for-like displacement, or perhaps perhaps not. Perhaps you have actually more. You have less. Well, it's ambiguous whether you'll have more or less rickshaw drivers with ride sharing. But since 1987, jobs have been displaced much faster than they have been reinstated. This is America. And so what happens in the American economy might happen here down the line. And we need to really think of building up a social protection system that protects people from this. The third big challenge to me is India. So if you look at Indian expenditure on their military, compared to what we're expending, that has increased exponentially. We are now 12% India's economic size. Just in the 90s, we were 17%. And imagine that if we had reformed quicker than them, we might have been a quarter or even a third their size today if we had reformed ourselves faster. We are at a point where actually we have decreased our military expenditure compared to the 80s and 90s over the last few years. And this hasn't been because we're expending more on education, it's because we have more debt liabilities coming up. And so if Pakistan wants to keep its national security balanced the way we've had historically, we need to reform the economy. And this is well understood now in GHQ, which is why perhaps economic security was front and center in the national security policy that came out last year. But so far, I haven't seen an understanding being generated of what we have to do in order to expand the economy. So this is just to highlight that reform can come from status quo politicians. A new political party or an existing political party just has to increase turnout in Pakistan from our current levels to India's current levels without a conquest vote. I don't have to win a vote from PTI or PMLN. If I can come up with a party where new voters turn out for elections such that the total goes up to India's current level, I will win that election. We have incredibly low support for the three major parties in Pakistan, the three biggest parties. Combined, PTI, PMLN, and PPP won, I believe, 35% of registered voters in the last two elections. The mix changed, obviously, but it's 35, 38, thereabouts. So the amount of people who are disenchanted and who might vote for a politician who's savvy enough to bring a new agenda to the table is quite large. Now, it's up to politicians to think of a narrative where they can then sell these ideas to the population, not convincing them that they're right, but speaking in their language. When Narasimha Rao went about the Indian reforms in '91, his party went and thought about how to sell it to their support base, and they couched it in traditional Indian and Hindu terms. They came up with ideas from scripture or from historical Indians, and they packaged it such that it was easier for people to accept. So my key takeaway is that the elite haven't felt the need for reform. The public hasn't really pushed for reform, but because of the threats that I've just mentioned, this is coming to a head, and we'll see this. Now, this can leave you pretty depressed. We've been stagnant. The first slide I showed you was GDP per capita. Everyone else is leaving us behind. And for me, it's events like this that give me hope. This is Alexis de Tocqueville writing in Democracy in America. He says, Americans of all ages, conditions, and all dispositions constantly unite together to hold fetes, found seminaries, build inns, construct churches, distribute books, dispatch missionaries to the antipodes. They establish hospitals, prisons, and schools by the same method, by coming together in societies. Finally, if they wish to highlight a truth or develop an opinion by the encouragement of a great example, they form an association. So what we need in this country is more associations coming together, civil society, talking about things, creating a language that is easy for politicians to latch onto, that politicians can't ignore anymore, and that will eventually lead us to reform. So to recap very quickly, Pakistan has been stagnating. We've got an uneducated youth bulge in the age of automation and military disparity, which I believe will eventually drive us out of the status quo. We need better security of life, property, and contract, better universities. We need to devolve revenue down to the provinces, and we need to open up to trade. And that's the last slide. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Ali, thank you. That was a tour de force. You leave us with some optimism, but there's some very depressing thoughts you also posit there, which are obviously of concern. I'm sure there are lots of questions out there. This slide, I'm afraid I asked Dr. Ali to place in, because it says we'd now like to open the floor to shorter speeches disguised as questions. So I obviously would like to have open the floor to questions, but kindly, if we can try and keep them relatively short. Obviously, if you want to make some points, please feel free to do so. But there are many people who would be wanting to contribute here. But really, what we want to do is focus on asking questions to Dr. Ali and getting his insights, which has been quite phenomenal. Dr. Ali, if I may start off with, one of the things you point out, you start off with quoting Adam Smith in terms of, having basically a secure environment which ensures your liberties to be happy and to sort of prosper, to pursue your endeavors.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be fundamentally missing because of our policing system, which generally, I speak for myself, I'm almost afraid to go to the police station for if there's some reason, and I try and avoid the police in all manner. And I probably am not the only person. And given that policing is a critical part of security, do you have any thoughts? And part of the reason is we seem not to spend too much on policing, and that comes back to a circular part where there's taxation is not enough and we don't have enough resources. That's a thought that came to my mind, that if security is not there, what do you do?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let me give you a few quick little facts to mull over. The first is that Pakistan spends, I think, 1/3. I'm sorry, Pakistani Punjab has 1/3 the police per capita that Indian Punjab does. My co-authors, including Dr. Ali Shima here in Pakistan, Ehsan Farooqi, and then Jake Shapiro at Princeton and others, have done a study where we looked at a very narrow research question on police across 5 or 6 different countries. Pakistan had the lowest expense that we were doing on our police, so least expenditure on police. Pakistan had the least term of a police officer in a police station, just 2 months, where I think the next lowest was something like 11 months or thereabouts. As you know, in the PTI government in particular, the IG in both KP and in Punjab had an average. I think the Punjab IG had 178 days on average in office before they were removed, and the KP IG had 230 or 240 days before they were removed. Now, if you go on, you'll often find on the ring road or actually many places, you'll find at a toll plaza, there'll be policemen standing waiting to hitch a ride because they actually live somewhere else. The police has posted them in Lahore, and every day but the police hasn't given them money for transport, and every day they have to hitch a ride. If you go on the motorway has stopped patrolling traffic infringements. They're only sitting there with speed cameras, and the reason is they don't have the petrol allowance, the POL, to drive their cars around. So we've underinvested in police. The question is why? And my favorite answer is, and I apologize for people who might have been here before, if you ask me to give a lecture on why the Pakistani, God forbid if we don't reform, if you ask me to tell you about why the economy isn't fixing itself, or why we haven't fixed the economy in 5 years, I might be pulling out like half of these slides. So a lot of these ideas many people might have heard before. My issue with policing in Pakistan is police itself is politicized. So individual officers are politicized, Thana Kacheri politics, all of that. But policing is an issue that we haven't politicized. We don't bring people into office to deal with precisely this issue, right? And so what we need, in my view, is to do that. And hand in hand with that is that your normal police functions have to be devolved to the municipal level, right? And then you also build up. So the federal government should be building up central intelligence, federal investigation agencies, all of that, and then decentralizing street level policing down to the municipality level, because that's when you know that the politician here is the one who's responsible for giving for holding the police accountable. That's when it'll become more politically salient. So to do that, we have to devolve, but we as a society also have to ask the question of why police is the way it is, right? And I would say that the police is the least trusted institution in the government. This is a survey response that my co-authors got in a previous survey. Across all government institutions, the police is the least trusted. Courts are next. So there are a lot of problems within police, but it's also massive underinvestment of resources, and we need to fix both of those things. Finally, something I found out recently. Policing is a devolved subject, so every province handles its own police, but the IG is appointed by the federation, which is something I don't understand. But I leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, we have. I'm seeing there are about 5-6 questions, and they're increasing. First, there's, and I'm making note of this. So please, all of you who are raising your hands, you will get a chance to ask your questions. We have enough time. But first, Ahmed Pirzada, Dr. Ahmed Pirzada, who's a member of EAG, and really there's no preference being given to EAG members or executive members, but since he had put his hands up first, so I'm asking him, would you like to ask or make a comment, Ahmed?
Yeah, sure. So thank you. I'm sure Umar, Farooq, and Muhammad were before me, but I'll just take the floor and say sorry. Okay, so I think this is wonderful that we're talking beyond deficits and inflation and so on. So these are really the challenges which we face. I think I've got two questions rather for Ali. One is that some of the research I've been looking at, or I was looking at, or I came across around property rights actually suggested that the property rights have actually done quite well in societies which were not feudal in structure. Or essentially that the initial point at which you start imposing property rights, those initial points should not be feudal-like. So, for example, there's a lot of discussion around that the seeds to industrial revolution in Britain were actually sown when a large chunk of land was somehow taken away, so to speak, from the church. Because some of the studies actually show that church at one point held or had a control over 1/3 of some prime land. Maybe it was agricultural land or farmland, I'm not exactly sure. So there's this element that somehow the initial conditions are also very important when we start thinking about property rights, right? So where do you see, so that's my first question, where do you see, do we have the right initial conditions where we can then start doing the judicial reform, impose the property rights, and then we just go in the right direction? Or is there something else which needs to happen so that we actually go in the right direction, right? So that's my first question. The second question, which is more to do with the optimism you left us with, that we are seeing a youth bulge, and there's one way or the other in all sorts of crude way, there's a demand coming from the youth bulge to reform the systems. I want to be optimistic here, obviously. But then what I see happening here in Europe, especially over the last 2-3 decades, is increasingly the newer generations, one after the other, they are becoming less and less optimistic, or let me say, they are becoming more and more pessimistic when it comes to democracy or having trust in democracy. And these are not, we are not talking about the youth, which is, let's say, generally, it's not extreme left or extreme right in that kind of a sense, where you will say, okay, fine, these guys are ideologically driven and they have nothing to do with, let's say, the political structure, then they just want to destroy everything. These are the people who are basically not being able to climb up the ladder, and they are sort of being left out. And despite this downward spiral in terms of people's or the newer generation's trust in democracy, not much is happening. No major reform is coming out of it, both in Europe, and also I'll probably extend this to the US as well. See the Black Lives Matters movement, it sort of took quite a bit of a limelight, but substantially not much really has come out of it in terms of institutional change. So what do you see? Maybe Pakistan is different, or what are your thoughts on that? Thank you.
Those are great questions. Thank you, Aman. So on the first one, you're right that the literature is mixed on property rights. There is, I think, the most forceful work has documented quite well that the better your property rights are established, the more you will you'll move towards prospering, and which is why I think I made it my response in security of life first, and then property and contract, because without security of life and without sort of the ability to be free from others arm twisting you, no other security can really emanate. So to the extent that we are more feudal, unless we are able to control the feudal's ability to damage the interests of the people in that area, we're not going to get far. I think there's another interesting thing where they talk about how, for example, if you start enforcing types of property rights early on, it can actually be detrimental. So, for example, intellectual property is held up as something that at the start of your journey, you can overlook in order to generate spillovers. I'm not convinced by that argument. I think you should enforce intellectual property rights from day one, also for moral reasons. But another one, for example, that I do think we can buy into is you could, for example, enforce property rights strictly in the likes of sort of all of these squatter communities that we have, right? And throw everyone out. And you see this happen in Karachi, in Orangi town, in sort of all sorts of squatters across the country on government lands. The important thing is not to just enforce the law, but to carve out these, not to tailor what the law is and how we are going to allocate those resources. So property right enforcement has to go hand in hand with critical roadblocks in every context, whether that is the fact that we are signing off squatted land to the squatter in some cases, or resettling them if they've been there for a very long time, whether it means ensuring that feudals don't have really a say on how people work, or what have you. The other thing about sort of being optimistic about democracy, I think it's important to be optimistic, excuse me, because it's so easy not to be. And then it becomes really hard to imagine a future. But remember, every country that has prospered has been where we are today, right? So for me, there is reason to be optimistic. What I didn't say is that there's also reason to be really worried. And the reason is sort of what you suggested, which is that this bulk of energy that we have, our youth, might sign up to the wrong ideas. It's very easy to imagine that either they sign on to the wrong idea, or they sign up to follow a leader and replace the core set of ideas that we should be talking about with this fascination with a leader. Sort of any resemblance with real events purely incidental. Okay? But you don't want to have abhi aap dekhiye, with your political parties here, imagine a PTI without Imran Khan. Imagine a PMLN without the guy whose name is on the party banner, right? Imagine a PPP without the Bhuttos, and each of these break down. But there are other parties that you can imagine without heads that have had heads being systematically removed, and that still have managed to thrive. And that's because they had that underlying ground organization, sort of base ideas, and they had distributed power accordingly. So yes, things could go very bad, but all I'm saying is there is the potential for things to go well. And this is where I think politicians today, even status quo politicians, someone from People's Party, from PMLN, from PTI could stand up and say, we're thinking about this wrong. Let's try and fix this. And if they're entrepreneurial enough, there's a mass of support out there waiting. So the 2/3 of the registered voters who didn't cast in a vote with the three big parties, they're there for the taking.
Excellent. Well, that's quite, I mean, there's an encouraging note there, but there's also, obviously, as with everything else you're saying, Ali, you are classic of an economist. You have two hands. So Look, in the interest of time, there are a lot of questions there. I know Umar Farooq wanted to ask a question. So what I would suggest is if Umar Farooq and Muhammad, followed by Muhammad, can ask their questions, and then Ali can respond. And then there's Raza Aga and someone called BZ can ask the question. So if we can take them in batches of two in the interest of time, that would be extremely useful.
And may I ask that after that, could you please consolidate the questions on the chat, and then we can get to those also?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
So if we can ask Umar Farooq and Mohammed to ask one after the other, first Umar and then Mohammed.
Thank you, Dr. Saab, for your presentation. It was really, really thought-provoking. And thank you, Jawad Saab, as well. So at the very beginning of your presentation, you talked about the rule of law.
Umar, can you do me a favor, please? Can you just introduce yourself very quickly?
Yes, sure. So I'm actually a LUMS grad myself. I was in BSc 98. I'm living in the UK now. I'm an IT consultant with an interest in econ. When I actually joined LUMS, it wasn't as an econ major, but I switched to CS. But as I've grown older, my interest in economics has deepened. So with that kind of background, obviously living abroad as well, we tend to kind of compare Pakistan with countries where we live, and we can see some patterns and some sort of obvious differences between Pakistan and here, and we wonder why things don't work like that in Pakistan. Anyway, so with that in mind, one thing that occurs to me, which was triggered by what you said, that due to security not being as well, people are limited in where they go to, which cities they go to invest, and that impacts development in that way. It seems to me that if you look at Pakistan in terms of urbanization, it's very low. And the number of cities, we are a rather large country in terms of population, 220 million, 250 million maybe. But we have very few large cities. So we've got a handful of really big ones like Karachi, Lahore, maybe Faisalabad. Then we have some smaller ones like Islamabad and Peshawar. And then our 11th city is Bahawalpur, which is around 700,000 people. And then after that, it's just a few 100,000. There isn't enough human resource in those smaller cities for anybody to go there and set up anything that that can generate value for the economy. So for me, that's a double-edged sword, where it is a risk, but it's also an opportunity. Where, for example, you can develop those smaller cities to a very high standard because there's a lot of open land. You could develop those and move population back to them, grow them, maybe set up industry there, and grow your economy in that manner. Obviously, this is very resource intensive, but then Pakistan has a lot of money which is not taxed. And this could be one way to bring it into taxation. So that's point one, if you can comment on that, the feasibility of something like that. And then the second point was, Pakistan has a very low level of documentation. And that kind of manifests itself in terms of rent seeking as well, in the sense that the people who are in the positions of power, who can give permits, etc., they are relying on that undocumented infrastructure to be able to do what they do, and that holds, productivity back. So by, for example, if you go back to late 90s, when we moved from the old style national ID card to the CNIC system, that was a step change and a massive improvement in terms of how we used to do things to how we are doing it now. And if you look at the budget of NADRA, that's a very tiny budget compared to some of the bigger projects that we've done. So it feels to me like it was a lost opportunity there, where we could have, for example, expanded NADRA by about 10 times or 20 times and documented everything via digitization. And why didn't that happen? If you can comment on that a little bit as well.
Okay. Ali, do you want to answer that, or shall we take Muhammad's question and then?
No, let's take other questions, but also if people could please distill down to your question in the interest of time. I'm happy to stay for a chat afterwards with a select few people if you want to explore these ideas further. But just in the interest of other people's time, let's get very precise questions now, please.
Yeah, please, if they can be shortened, really, we don't have too much time. Mohammed, do you want to ask a question?
Yes, thank you for doing this. My name is Muhammad. I'm based in Toronto, attended schools in the US, and by training have mostly spent time in corporate finance. I have a two-part question, and I'll keep it quick. One, Pakistan obviously needs to increase its exports. And one of the slides that you mentioned talked about how manufacturing, I think, as a percentage of GDP in the US has gone down, and that's been replaced with technology. Now, in terms of increasing exports, Pakistan, I understand, used to have a competitive advantage a few decades ago in maybe textiles that perhaps no longer is there. Are there any certain sectors that you think the government should be prioritizing where Pakistan has some sort of a competitive advantage to increase its exports on a global scale? Number one. Number two is, now obviously Pakistan needs to increase its spending on education, healthcare, infrastructure. And one of the ways you can do that, as you know, is by increasing the provision of credit, debt in the economy. I think Pakistan's debt to GDP is still at a bit of a lower level compared to India and China. So I'm curious, and if you have any thoughts on where, on what sort of the optimal level for range for Pakistan's debt to GDP should be. It doesn't seem to be, and why doesn't the government increase the spending if it lags behind that of China and India? So those are my two questions. Thank you.
Great questions. Thank you. Do you want to take one more and then I can do a batch of three and then?
Okay, I was going to ask, there's a question in the chat box, which I'll include, which is a point you raised, is the differential taxation rates and in the way it incentivizes or disincentivizes business growth. I don't know if that's completely different, but I think it's a very important point you make, and it's worth re-highlighting. This business of differential tax rates is a real problem in Pakistan. I personally hold that.
Okay, so let me start with what Umar had said. About 10 years ago, I was on the, I helped write the Punjab growth plan. I think it was 2014 or thereabouts. And when you think about, okay, how does Punjab grow? You have to think about strategies and priorities. What it ended up being was a laundry list. And I find that most government documents strategizing on how to proceed end up justifying existing patterns because everything the government does has some logic to it, right? You have a fisheries department, there's some logic to it. You have the government patronizes arts and culture. There's a logic to it. There's a logic to anything. And so my worry is that sometimes we end up encompassing so much that there's no focus or no clarity that we see. I'd encourage you all to look at this website that I recently discovered through someone recommending it on Twitter, the 1991 project at George Mason University, where they document how India undertook the reforms that they did. And you can see that it's only a very small set of ideas that they're worried about. And so I'm going to make a couple of strong claims here. I think we should not worry about the energy crisis. I say that because the cost of solar panels is plummeting internationally. And I think that in the next few years, we'll have enough energy, clean energy, to not have to worry too much about it. At the very least, it's not the first problem that I would deal with. compared to the ones that I've mentioned today. Urbanization, I think you fix property rights, and then you ensure that you've created the right plans in terms of for future growth. You allow for you ensure better planning of roads and leaving space for schools and all of that. Whatever goes into urban planning, you focus on future urban planning, but not sort of worry too much about existing cities. And I say that, and I know that a lot of people I respect hugely think very highly of the importance of fixing cities. I agree. I just don't think that it's something that is urgent. Female labor force participation. I think if we get the right factories in place, there will be demand for women. We won't increase our female labor force participation through laws. We'll increase it by creating the industries that create pressure, and that will then sort of women will just sort of come into the market because they will be they'll be able to compete in the marketplace with men. Population, right? Economic growth is a contraceptive, and so I'm not worried about population growth today. I would worry if after growing for 10 years we still don't have population under control. So what I'm saying is we really have to sequence and focus our energies on a very sharp couple of things, because it's very hard to push through. Our status quo and the default strategy that we take is we put a little bit of effort into lots of things and nothing happens. I've seen this on the ground in Pakistan for 10 years. And what I'm proposing is that you make the sacrifices on 10 things to focus on 2. And so the ones that I've mentioned here, I think are primal. I wouldn't worry as much about the informal economy at the moment, but that's a very big debate, and I can see the argument for why. The Nadra digitization thing, I don't know enough about, and I don't think it's central to this conversation necessarily, so let me skip that. The question about prioritizing sectors for exports, I think industrial policy has a lot of evidence both ways, both against it and keeping with the instincts of this group, emphasizing the role of markets more. And there is good evidence that in equilibrium, we underinvest in agglomeration, we underinvest in research, and therefore there is value to some industrial policy. The problem is that industrial policy typically is very hard to handle politically. We end up facing elite capture, and therefore it ends up in Pakistan. It has historically ended up doing more bad than good. And so even though there's a good case to be made for industrial policy, much of East Asia did it. Pakistan has been trying it for 70 years, hasn't worked. I think it's time for us to focus on what Javed Saab was emphasizing again, on creating a level playing field. I don't think that's in the absolute. I think there are places where you need to control what markets are doing. But I think in general, I think we are closer to a command economy in this country than we are to, we have the worst of both sides, or actually of those systems. Debt to GDP, I think the issue with debt to GDP isn't that it's high. And when you see debt to GDP, Pakistan is smack in the middle of the list of countries. You think, what's the big deal? But then look at debt as a percentage of government revenue. And then look at debt plus defense as a percentage of government revenue. And you see that it squeezes us too much, which is why I said, I think we are under-taxing the economy. We need to expand taxes to twice what they are now. And what that will do is it will make our debt more sustainable. It will allow us to invest more in public goods. So issue isn't debt to GDP, issue is debt to government revenue. If you expand debt to government, if you expand government revenue to 2 times what it is today, that issue will die down. I think we're done with those questions. Let's go on with others.
Can I ask Raza Saab and Abdul Rahman Saab, please, if you could ask briefly because we are really now already about 1.5 hours into the talk. If you could ask your questions briefly, and then we can try and sort of round it up with some questions from the chat box.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Javed.
Thank you for.
Raza Saab, you can go ahead.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Dr. Hasanain, for a wonderful presentation, and Javed Saab, thank you for moderating. 2 questions. I mean, what will it take for the powers that be in Pakistan what will serve as an impetus for them to actually institute some of the changes that you're talking about. और दूसरी बात ये हमारी आवाम के लिए why don't they demand more change and more reform? ये समझ ही नहीं आती मुझे. So any light on that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Excellent. That's something that's always bothered me as well. Abdul Rahman Saab, please.
Thank you, Javed Saab, and Ali, great presentation. My question, I just have one question, and it's on the external front. So if we kind of have to make a 5-year plan for Pakistan, I think everybody would agree that we have to increase our exports to somewhere around $50 billion. And if we see our export base today, I think this growth can only come from 2 sectors, textiles and IT. If we want to develop any other sector, it would probably have an impact after 5 years, or at least 3 to 4 years. So I was reading an article yesterday that we are still exporting $4 billion worth of thread and cloth. So if we could just develop this industry, it would also add female participation into the labor force, and then we could take this $4 billion into $12 billion. This would, if the oil prices decline a little bit after a few years and we add this $10 billion in export, we are quite in a good position. So what is the hindrance in this? The whole thing we end up with is calculating the subsidy amount. And most of that subsidy amount is calculated in a wrong manner. We are calculating subsidy amount in terms of like the benchmark is RLNG, whereas it should be the overall cost of gas. And in electricity, it should not be the rate we are giving to other industries, but it should be the overall cost of the basket. So if we can agree that these are the 2 sectors which are our only lifeline in the next 5 years, so why cannot we understand that we have to do this, and whatever the minimum amount of subsidy we have to give, we have to give. There is no other option. Otherwise, we'll be living in a world of 300 or 400 rupees a dollar.
Okay, great. I'm going to do 3 things. First, I'm going to ask that if anyone has not had their question responded to, please reach out to either the EAG handle or my own Twitter and engage in these conversations. I know we're short on time, but it would be lovely to keep engaging, and I want to ensure that we all get a chance to debate. So please do reach out if I miss anything. Let me start with this comment or question, Abdul Rahman Saab. I've got 2 or 3 responses to that. The first is that in my 12, 13, 14 years of working in Pakistan, I've never gone to a meeting that I was asked to go to that said, come back, go away and do rigorous work and come back in 6 months with a report. They're always saying, what's the recommendation? Can you come and present on this topic next week? What are the ideas that you have for us to implement? We're going to have a meeting to finalize our plans in 3 weeks, and so on and so forth. I've had a meeting, I've been called to a meeting in 2 hours, right? Subha 10 baje keh rahe hain, please come to a meeting. It's actually a very important government meeting. We've decided to hold it in 2 hours. Please come to our offices. So one thing that I would say is that we have to back out of this thinking of what do we do in the next 5 years. I actually don't care very much what we do in the next 5 years. I care where we are in 10 years. And I think that it is because we keep thinking about how to outsmart the economy that we end up in these messes. The fundamental idea of a market system is that disaggregated sources of demand and supply come together in the aggregate and ensure that resources are allocated to the best use possible. So if the market is saying that the textile sector, for example, the textile sector isn't paying for the electricity at the cost that we can generate it, the answer is not to subsidize their electricity, for example. The answer is to ensure that your electricity technology is improved, and then to allow it to be allocated the way it is. Because I don't agree with the fundamental sort of statement that you made, which is that we can agree that textile and IT are the places where export growth will come from. I don't know if that's true. I mean, how what's the tool that I can use to assess that? Textile has been quite a sort of babied sector of the economy for quite a while. I'm not sure if we're going to see that growth. That's the first thing. The second thing is that when you do that, what you're doing is you're not allowing for new opportunities, for new industries to come up, and for firms that aren't viable to die, creative destruction, right? So these are exactly the arguments that we've been using for a very long time for example, sort of for the car industry now being given for smartphones, all of that. I don't want to pick winners. I don't think that we pick winners well, and I think that when we pick winners, they're picked to create opportunities for interference that pay off for people making those interferences. So I'm just I have a very different viewpoint on this. I again see the logic. If we had Japan's MITI sitting here deciding which industry to support, I'd be on board. But we don't have that. We don't even have the planning commission. We have political parties making a decision in this country. So I'm not in favor of that because I don't trust the politics. Coming to Javed sir.
You have another question to answer, which is regarding
yes,
you locally.
Right.
But I just wanted to interject, if you'll forgive me for doing so.
Right.
There's a strong vision document or vision within EAG, which really wants to not have this business of the public sector or the government deciding what industries it should be promoting. There might be incentives, not in the form of subsidies, but in other forms, in terms of connectivity, in terms of information, in terms of training. There are many other areas where there can be intervention, but we'd much rather that the government did not intervene directly and try and promote one sector over another. Very often, these things which are meant for public good actually end up being rent-seeking opportunities. And we have seen that in the auto sector. I think to a large extent that may be even true for textiles. It may be questionable. But one of the things I'm fearing is that we might be seeing that in the mobile sector as well. So what Ali is saying is very much in line with the vision document of EAG. It's something which we decry and generally are working against quite unequivocally. Sorry, Ali.
Right, and just to cap that off, the reason for that is precisely that if you tweak either through tax cuts or through subsidies the cost that a company faces, you're not getting the contrast with the opportunity cost of that resource, and therefore efficiency will generally tend to decline, although there are exceptions. As I said, theoretical exceptions, yes. In our political economy, no, I don't support that. Before I come to Raza Saab's last question, very quickly, Arshad Saab has a question on healthcare. Raza Saab, I have some work on economics of healthcare that you can look up. To my mind, again, as I said, there are lots of things that we have to worry about. Healthcare beyond basic vaccinations and water sanitation, I think can't be the priority for the next 10 years simply because we don't have the money. And I know that's going to be controversial, but let me come to the final question, which is Raza Saab's. And it goes back to my earlier point about sort of asking why the elite haven't reformed. I think the elite haven't reformed because they haven't felt the needs to do it so far. I think these the things that I identified here, one, India's military pressure on us, that's only 20 years, 25 years old at this point, and we still haven't felt the true effects of that. Two, automation hasn't really hit our shores at the moment. And three, this youth bulge that we have it's been shaking things at the margins, but it hasn't really shown that it is a force. So the elite haven't given us the reforms we need because they've never had the need to. They are the winners of a stagnating and declining Pakistan, and not just the politicians, but whoever is sitting in a farmhouse in Pakistan, whether that's politician, whether it's big business, whether that's military officers, they're the winners in a declining Pakistan. You know, a businessman who is able to carve out exceptions to market forces for themselves is a winner. A politician who doesn't have to provide as much, who can engage in corruption, all of that is a winner. And an army officer that's insulated from from, I guess, the milieu of the place these days, where we are facing incredible inflation and perhaps there's a new golf course being created. These people are being insulated from, these are the winners of a stagnating Pakistan. I think institutionally, for the military, the big question is, it absolutely has that. So I think there are a lot of patriotic people there who also have in their interest a strong army that can compete well with the Indians. But I think that there is this, they haven't really found the way, and perhaps it's against some of their interests. Coming to why the population hasn't demanded it. So I've thought about this a lot, and I think the reason for the population not demanding it is that the population is incredibly confused, and we don't have an intelligentsia that is creating answers for them. So you turn on a TV channel, and we're so fixated on the here and now that TV channels don't really have many serious conversations. These talk shows will talk about, oh, what happened today and what's your response to it, rather than conversations like the one we're having today, where we're thinking about 50 years, 100 years. And why doesn't that intelligentsia exist? I think there's a history to it. In particular, Ziaul Haq sort of persecuted a lot of intelligentsia. A lot of people moved abroad. I have professors that I worked with in the US whose families of scholars moved out of Pakistan, never to return. And I think it's only now that after, and also the sort of censorship that we're seeing on both media and of academics and civil society, I think it's stunted the growth of intelligentsia. But I also think I feel a lot of hope looking at the conversations that we're now having, on media such as this. And I think it's about packaging these ideas into simple ideas that the rest of the population that can get behind. I call it the TikTok population. I've had someone tell me that's rude. I don't mean it from a rude place. But people who are more on TikTok and less on Twitter, look at pretty much the entire youth of the country is on TikTok. And if you're not speaking to them, if you're just speaking to a space of, 70 people, then that's not good enough. So it's on us, it's on journalists, it's on universities to really percolate these ideas, to have them embed into the population, and then I expect that we'll see demand. Also, I would say that we need to come together on common ideas that go beyond Subaiyat, Firqawaraniyat, and those sort of things, where we're really fighting one against the other. We have to think at the level of Pakistan, and I remain hopeful that will happen. So I think that's a good place to end.
We will take last one question from Mohammed Sadiq Saab, and then we'll try and round it up. And because this has been, it's already gone on for 1 hour and 40 minutes, so I'm sure Ali, you're quite tired. But if we can take one question from Mohammed Saab, and look, we are open. EAG will only encourage questions coming directly, and we'll pose them to Ali and any of the other EAG members. But please, Mohammed Saab, if you can ask a question. Mohammed Sadiq Saab.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, you're very audible. Yes.
Sir, आपने डिस्कस किया था एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन के हवाले से, क्योंकि मैं फ्यूचर में ज्वाइन कर रहा हूँ गवर्नमेंट एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन. सो जो मेरा मेन क्वेश्चन है वो पाकिस्तान के लीगल स्ट्रक्चर से है कि हम कहते हैं कि हम लोकल गवर्नमेंट को और एम्पावर कर देते हैं, लेकिन जो डिस्कशंस आती हैं वो ये आती हैं कि अच्छा नेशनल गवर्नमेंट है, फेडरल गवर्नमेंट है, फिर प्रोविंसेस हैं, फिर इसके बाद लोकल है. तो अब हमने 18 अमेंडमेंट के बाद कुछ अचीव कर लिया प्रोविंशियल ऑटोनॉमी। अब उस प्रोविंशियल ऑटोनॉमी के बाद वाला जो मरहला है वो आपने अभी भी करंटली देखा होगा कि किस तरह लोकल गवर्नमेंट इलेक्शंस कराए जाते हैं। सो उसको एक बेहतर लोकल गवर्नमेंट बनाने के लिए क्या हमें वो चाइना मॉडल अप्लाई करना चाहिए, जिसमें फिर हमारी डिस्कशन चली जाती है कि अच्छा हम प्रेसिडेंशियल सिस्टम लाना चाहते हैं, क्योंकि वो उसके साथ ज़्यादा लिंक है। फिर अगर हम किसी और इंडिया की तरफ जाना चाहते हैं, लेकिन अनफॉर्चुनेटली इंडिया के बारे में हमें इतना पता नहीं होता कि किस तरह वो स्टेट लेवल पे, किस तरह वो लोकल गवर्नमेंट किस तरह काम कर रही है, क्योंकि उसमें फिर रिसर्च करना भी हमारे लिए पॉलिटिकली वायबल उस हिसाब से नहीं होता। सो काइंडली इसको, इस पॉइंट को थोड़ा सा एलेबोरेट करें कि पाकिस्तान के करंट कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल स्ट्रक्चर में लोकल गवर्नमेंट कैसे आगे बढ़ेगी, ताकि पॉलिटिशियंस प्लस ब्यूरोक्रेट्स दोनों एक कॉमन ग्राउंड पे काम कर सके, एक कॉमन गोल के लिए काम कर सकें। जैसे आपने कहा कि डीसी एक इलाके का डीसी दूसरे इलाके के डीसी के साथ कंपटीशन, पॉजिटिव कंपटीशन में हो कि वो बिजनेस को रिफॉर्म करे। सेकंड सर, आपसे एक सजेशन लेनी है कि हम ऐसे सिस्टम्स के बारे में कैसे पढ़ सकते हैं जो लोकल गवर्नमेंट इस किस्म के कौन से मॉडल्स पढ़ सकते हैं, कौन से कंट्रीज को पढ़ सकते हैं, अगर आप उनके बारे में बुक्स, रिसोर्सेज कोई भी आप सजेस्ट करना चाहते हैं, सो दैट विल बी वेरी हेल्पफुल।
Sure. So that's a great question. I'm glad we stuck around for it. I don't know whether to congratulate you or commiserate for joining the government. Lekin we'll congratulate you because this is an optimistic talk, and it's because of people sort of who thinkers joining the government go in at least with that create capacity also. So it's important to do, and I'm glad you're doing it. जी, so legal structure जो है वो फेडरेशन लेवल पर होता है. Those are problems that impact all Pakistanis, such as defense, उसके बाद provincial level पे और local level पे. और मेरी जो reading है from China वो ये है कि हमें डिसेंट्रलाइजेशन की तरफ जाना चाहिए. उसकी एक वजह तो ये है, और जिस वजह से शायद चाइना ने किया वो ये थी that China had China's revenue, China basically was bankrupt, right? It didn't have any money to give, and so when they started to reform, they said ठीक है, जाओ और अपनी फीस लो डिस्ट्रिक्ट लेवल पर, वहीं खर्चो, हम आपको. इनफैक्ट दे डिड समथिंग रिमार्केबल. दे जस्ट put the allocations to the districts, they held them constant over time. So imagine इस साल गवर्नमेंट डिपार्टमेंट का बजट जो है वो फ्रीज कर दिया जाए, तो 20% रिडक्शन हो गई उस बजट में. Now you have to figure out where to meet those goals. और एक्चुअली पाकिस्तान में हो रहा है. मैं कहानी सुनाता हूँ आपको. आज से अगेन 8-10 साल पहले की बात है. मैं हाफसाबाद में एक कचहरी गया, तो वहाँ असिस्टेंट कमिश्नर को, मैं तफसील में नहीं जाता, बट ऑफिशियली एक डिमांड आई लाहौर से प्रोविंशियल गवर्नमेंट की कि आपने फलाना काम करना है, और उस काम को करने के लिए डिस्ट्रिक्ट के पास पैसे नहीं थे. तो सर अच्छा काम तो करना है क्योंकि लाहौर से ऑर्डर आया, तो करेंगे कैसे? कि कहते हैं कोई मसला नहीं है, बाहर कोई 3-4 पटवारी बैठे हुए हैं, तो उनसे कहते हैं अरेंज कर देंगे. और जाहिर है वो पटवारी क्यों अरेंज करेगा? बिकॉज उसको डिस्ट्रिक्ट कमिश्नर जो क्या होता है डीसी का ऑफिस है, डिस्ट्रिक्ट कमिश्नर का ऑफिस है, उसके अंदर उसको एक पाथ चाहिए टू गेटिंग हिज वर्क डन. ये चाइना ने एग्जैक्टली ये किया. अब हम इसको कहेंगे बहुत बुरी बात है, मैं इसको बहुत बुरा समझता रहा, बल्कि मैं पढ़ाता रहा कि बहुत बुरी चीज़ है, बट actually China showed that for the interim period, now after they got their house in order, once they had better taxes, they started rolling those things back. They went on anti-corruption drives. The current premier went on a big anti-corruption drive, but उससे पहले they used it strategically and they said अच्छा आप अपने पैसे इस तरह लेकर आएं ताकि आपके basic needs पूरे हो रहे हो. So now I don't think कि चाइना मॉडल प्रेसिडेंशियल है. आई थिंक पाकिस्तान ने, जैसा पाकिस्तान में आप चाइनीज खाना खाते हैं ना, तो चाइना में एक्चुअली ये खाना नहीं मिलता. दिस इज नॉट चाइनीज फूड, दिस इज पाकिस्तानी चाइनीज. उस तरह चाइना का ग्रोथ मॉडल भी जो है ना वो पाकिस्तानी चाइनीज बनाया हुआ है हमने. It's not the actual growth model that China undertook. So there are Union Ang has 2 good books on this. और मैंने एक यहाँ आपको एक resource दिया हुआ है. If you just Google, there's a Journal of Economic Literature paper. I am blanking on the author's name. That looks at why China undertook reform. वो free है, आप website पे जाएं आपको मिल जाएगा. Union Ang की 2 किताबें हैं. One is I forget again the name, but her name is spelled Y-U-E-N 2 times, and then Ang, A-N-G. तो उनकी किताबें देख लें, वो अच्छी हैं. अगर आपने लोकल गवर्नमेंट को पाकिस्तान के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में पढ़ना है तो अली चीमा साहब हैज एक्सटेंसिव वर्क ऑन दिस, एंड आई एक्चुअली सेट अप एन इवेंट. तो अगर आप यूट्यूब पे जाके लिखेंगे अली चीमा डिसेंट्रलाइजेशन, you'll find an event where I had hosted him and other people to talk about local governments. You have to create, the bottom line for me is you have to both require districts to generate their own resources and then leave them to their devices. उनको पैसे वो उनकी जेब में भी डाल रहे हो. And finally, basically आप उनको residual claimant बनाते हैं. Residual claimant economics में कौन होता है? जो entrepreneur, the guy who gets the profit or loss from a situation. अभी गवर्नमेंट ऑफिसर क्या होता है कि वो जब अपना वो कोई काम करते हैं, अब लेट्स से उन्होंने एक प्रोजेक्ट किया है, एक स्कूल बनाया, वो स्कूल बनाना उनकी ड्यूटी लगी थी, वो उन्होंने बना लिया. उसके बाद स्कूल में कोई आ रहा है कि नहीं आ रहा, that's not their worry anymore. And one of my studies shows that in Punjab at that time, this is 2011, 50% of appointed doctors were not showing up to work on a random day. Right? वो क्यों है? वो इसलिए है क्योंकि अगर वो उसका प्राइवेट, आप उसको कहते हैं ना, आप हमारे डॉक्टर हैं, आप शाम को क्लिनिक में मुफ्त का बैठ जाएं और आप अपनी फीस खुद लें. I promise you कि वहाँ क्लिनिक जो है वो खाली नहीं पड़ा रहेगा. Right? इसको थोड़ा सा हमें, it's not ideal of course because it means that you're going to have people not being provided services, लेकिन वो बेचारों को तो अभी भी services नहीं मिल रही, अभी भी क्लिनिक्स खाली पड़े होते हैं, गोस्ट स्कूल्स बने होते हैं. तो अगर वहाँ आप sort of इनको रेजिडुअल क्लेमेंट बनाएं डिस्ट्रिक्ट लेवल पर और उनको, एंड देन यू विल क्रिएट दैट हेल्दी कंपटीशन, तो बेहतरी आ सकती है. बट जस्ट टू रिकैप, यू आस्क्ड फॉर सोर्सेज. यूनियन एंग, ये इधर लिखा हुआ है, इनकी किताबें 2 on China, and she's a very prolific speaker also.
Great. Ali, thank you very much. I think that we have covered a lot today. If you want to have a few words just to conclude, I will just very quickly say, just before you conclude, I just want to say a few things. Frankly speaking, there's lots of numbers there and things I didn't know, which I would love to have your presentation, and I think other people within the who participated would like to have the presentation as well. It really depends on you if you can put it on site somewhere where we can share it, or what you are willing to share. The other thing that it is very important to understand is it is this kind of awareness that needs to be disseminated among the general public. We had about, at one point, we had something like 85 people. I would imagine most of these people were relatively well versed and of a certain degree of education, but we need to have this really discussed among the so-called masses. And one of the conversations that had taken place before this presentation was being done was that should it be in Urdu. I increasingly think probably not for this media, but for TikTok and for other things, it needs to be in Urdu, and people need to understand some of these concepts. And they need to know what kind of deprivation is taking place and how we are being left behind. That might create the pressure and the anger that needs to happen. I think there is some anger, but it is unaware and it is not supported by facts. Once people have anger or some motivation and there's also facts to support it, it's going to be a very different force that happens. And I think यहाँ डॉक्टर अहमद खलील अहमद साहब हैं, वो कहते हैं अशरफिया कभी चेंज नहीं होगी. बिल्कुल सही, कहीं दुनिया में अशरफिया कभी नहीं चेंज होती, मगर उनको चेंज करा जाता है. So I think that's something we need to fix. I'm not a revolutionary myself, but I think these are times where we're all forced to have some kind of revolutionary thoughts. That's my little spiel, but Ali, it's your floor. Would you like to conclude?
Yes. So first of all, I just want to thank the 45 people who are still here. आप 2 घंटे तकरीबन बैठ के आपने हमारी गप सुनी. That's very kind of you, and it also means that we have that interest on these things. That's a great sign. I think my final submission to you, and before I get to that, it's a privilege also to speak because आपको नए ideas आते हैं. You think about. So while I was preparing for this, is a slide deck that I've been building for. First presented, I think, a year and a half ago or something, or more than that. And हर दफा थोड़ा सा ऐड होता है, थोड़ा सा थिंकिंग रिफाइन होती है. तो आज भी बैठ के जब कर रहा था तो इसका सेकंड हाफ भी जो है कि हम क्यों नहीं रिफॉर्म कर रहे, इस पे थोड़ा सा ज़्यादा तफसील में जाने का कुछ दिल किया. वो कभी शायद मौका मिला तो उस पर भी काम करेंगे. I think what I would end at is this. We have been left behind. Clearly, you can see that when you compare us with, you pick the country basically, aajkal the Bangladesh, Vietnam, China, India. In the 1980s, Pakistan was richer than China per capita. It stagnated, right? There is no inherent reason why those countries were able to reform and we haven't. We absolutely can reform. And I am very positive that inshallah, in my lifetime, not even just my kids, मैं पहले कहता था मेरे बच्चों के lifetime. I think in my lifetime, we will at least embark on the journey. I am very confident that inshallah, my kids will live in a developed Pakistan. This is not just being foolhardy. I think precisely because it's happened in so many countries around us, that I think we're now living in the Asian century. We're just the last ones to be moving, or not just the last ones. अगर आप ब्रिटेन की तारीख देखें तो ब्रिटेन से पहले जिन यूरोपियन कंट्रीज ने डेवलप किया, they did it, but Britain laughed last but laughed longest, right? So इसी तरह ये भी हो सकता है कि पाकिस्तान इन सब ममालिक को तरक्की में पीछे छोड़ जाए. सिर्फ ज़रूरत ये है कि हम पहले कदम सही उठा सकें, और उसके लिए हम सब कोशा होंगे, छोटे बड़े आपस में मिलकर. तो I just don't see any theoretical reason, any logic why we can't get out of this. We just have to stop thinking about the IMF and about subsidies for a bit. So inshallah सब ठीक हो जाएगा. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for joining us. We will have many more of this. We might even persuade Dr. Ali to come back again. If you can persuade more friends, and if they want to hear this, we'll have other speakers. I can tell you, as I said right at the beginning, there are some other speakers within EAG who have some very interesting things to say. So one by one, we'll have over the next few weeks more speakers. So please spread the word that EAG with Prime is bringing new ideas, and these new ideas are there to transform Pakistan. One final word: we have been supported by the Frederick Neumann Foundation in many of the presentations and doing the platforms. I'd like to thank them as well. But really, it's been a great occasion, and really appreciate the 43 people who are still there. And there was something at one point, something like 85 people. So there's interest in this, Dr. Ali and the rest of the EAG team. We need to do more of it. Thank you very much.
Take care, everyone. Khuda Hafiz.
Thank you. Khuda Hafiz.